expecting 3 more today. They're still not here. They were given until 4 p.m. So that means they have an hour. So I may, in the first hour, be in and out, in and out.
How long is this thing gonna last?
It's scheduled from 3 to 5. Last time it was only an hour and 15 minutes. I don't know. There's probably more to discuss this time because we actually have some analysis. So. And
What am I doing? Gee, I gotta go. Gee.
I got it on here just in case you want to do that
Okay,
faster.
let's see. Clerk's office. And what did she say that? I just told Libby to say it for me just minutes ago. It was called. What was the name of that?
I don't know what he called it. Hold on, I can find out for you in just a second. Go here. What's the title? Merger presentation. It's PowerPoint.
Right there. Okay. Now let me see. It's yep. So I gotta get it all over this daggone screen. Let's see.
How will we be able to move the slides?
I do. Oh, somebody needs to move them.
That's what I was going to say. So if I am running back and forth because of the Art in City Hall, is there a way to do it on the clerk's computer if you're sitting there? What about for the committee chairs? How are you? Nice to see
We're
you.
gonna call Olivia up here and ask. Call Sonia ask. No, I should be able to do it.
You tell me. Am I calling?
Nobody.
So everybody's going to be late. The majority of the members sat on this side, so I guess put it on this side, yeah, if you don't mind. That would work, yeah. So as far as changing the slides though, would you be able to do that from your computer or no? If we load it on your computer, would we be able to do it, or does it have to be? So what about if we did it from the chairs? Would the chairs be able to move that slide back and forth? It can only be done from the county attorney's desk. Right. But I'm saying if I'm not physically in here to move the slide,
Who's gonna be doing the presentation?
I believe it would be Mr. Coombs's associates, Mr. Ruther. I guess he could come over here and move the slide.
Yeah,
But,
he can. I'll do it.
well, I mean, that's what I'm saying. If you're,
I can leave from over there because
Okay.
I've already set everything up over there.
because I hopefully will be able to
You
be
just
in
want-
here, but because of the whole Art in City Hall thing, I'm
You raised from doing it? No, I'm just
I'm
kidding.
sorry, yeah, I mean, you can ask Edwin. Edwin's to control all of that, so.
I can do it. Here, let's move from this right here. This is ready,
Okay,
so it's gonna be there.
okay.
And that's ready. That was ready.
What's on that one? What's gonna be on that one?
Whatever you want.
I guess,
We don't want that on there because then they have to look.
right, but I understand Mayor Jung, I believe, is gonna sit on the side already too. Do we need to see the, people who are WebExing in, per se? Could we just do it on both screens? Does that make sense? Or do we need to actually physically see Ja'Cory? If he, I don't know, he just wasn't last time, that's what I was just thinking, that he might need to WebEx in. I mean, they physically have a copy at the desk too, so they should be able to use it regardless. As long as it's on one screen, I think that's clear. So let's just leave it at that. What time is it? Okay. And we still haven't seen Nemus. What else do I need to get? This is for attendance. I gotta go down and grab my computer so I can take notes. So. Well, I'm waiting for Nemus, and I can ask him if he can.
I'm here with Paul. Matt.
Matt, I'm Brian. I'm the guy who just printed out all those guys. And Cheryl was nice enough to load it up for us real quick. We've only got it on the one screen. Do you think that's going to be an issue? They do have a physical copy. So that's what I was going to say. We need an actual person to move the slide.
Just move it, the mouse, you know how to do it.
Well, can you do the?
You can do that, yeah.
Okay, I was going
either
to say
way.
that's physically probably better than sliding too many at one time.
Yeah.
Make it full screen? I mean, oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, because that one takes up the whole thing. I don't know if it's just the way that it's. I think it's the way it's presented on here. The aspect ratio is. Yeah, it's just because of that. I think it's presentable. I can see it. How about full size? How's the presentation? How do I full screen it again? If you have it. Oh, full screen mode. Thank you. Control L. It used to be F5. I thought when I was a kid, maybe something different. Alrighty, I'll be right back. See if I can catch these.
It's starting on time here.
Once he starts to do the presentation, I'll put it on that screen and this screen. And then I take those and put them back here. How about that? Is that okay? Okay.
Where's the mic thing?
It's on now.
There we go. Hello. I think we're going to have to start now. We're about almost 10 minutes in. Apparently, a number of the commissioners are unable to attend this session. I understand that at least 2 of the legislators have been called to a meeting in Frankfurt, so they're unable to attend. That's Ms. Adams and Jason and the co-chair. So I am unpreparedly chairing today. So let's see if we can move. I've just seen a copy of the order here. We're going to have someone call the order. The clerk will call the order. The roll, please.
Co-chair Representative Jason Nemus. Co-chair Errol Jones.
Present.
Senator Gerald Neal. Senator Julie Rock Adams. Senator Mike Nemus.
Here.
Representative Ken Fleming. Representative Pamela Stevenson. Councilmember Anthony P. Argentini. Councilmember Ja'Cory Arthur.
Present.
Councilmember Cindy Fowler. Marianne Butler.
Here.
Shelby Williams Somerville.
Here.
Scott Schuenberger.
Present.
Mayor Bonnie John. Sean Drausbach.
Okay, well, let's proceed then. I'd ask that Professor Coombs be present. One, let's get an update, and then I think maybe some of the committees might have some questions for Professor Coombs. But would you mind, Professor Coombs, give us a quick update on where you stand and how things stand in terms of the timeline that we discussed at our last meeting, looking towards making certain we make our September 1 date?
Sure. So we continue to acquire massive data sets and chop them up and analyze the data. you're going to have to give us a couple of months we have millions of data points that we're getting from MetroSafe, from Public Works about the road system, the sanitation system, the property tax files from PVA, et cetera. So it's going to take us a couple of months to massage all that and be able to tell you good stories. So I thought we'd lead, while we're waiting for a lot of that analysis, with the demographic profile that Matt Ruther's got today. And Bill Hoyt is here to talk to you at whatever length you like about sort of the economics of local governments. And I will fairly soon, I'd say within the next week or two, be able to give you a pretty good snapshot of the complete revenue and expenditures of all the local governments in the county. So there's 82 suburban cities and metro government, and I have now got and pretty much analyzed the detailed revenues and expenditures for all the local governments in the county, and am starting to put together exhibits and tell stories, et cetera. But you need to let me clean it up a little more and flesh the stories out, and then I'll be able to give you a presentation, say by the next meeting that you have here. So I thought today we would do demographics and general economics, and then as we go forward the next few months, we'll just get increasingly into the details. The messiest part of it, that takes the longest, will be analyzing all the services, particularly police, fire, EMS, sanitation, garbage, road work, road paving work. The data's flowing, but it's going to take us a while to roll it up and tell stories.
Great. Well, thanks for that overview. If no one's got any objections or questions as to what Professor Coombs has said to this point, let's then move into the demographic data that you provided.
Can you all hear me okay?
Do we have a second one? Yeah. Okay. We're gonna do that later.
All right, so I'm Matt Ruther. I'm a professor at the University of Louisville. I'm leading sort of the demographic part of this study. And today I just want to give you some background information on what we've seen in the county over the past 20 years to sort of set the stage for what is to come. So you are probably aware of this because you are here in this commission, but what we're doing here is breaking the budget and services of Jefferson County down into three separate parts. And these parts are shown in this map here. The green here is the urban service district. This is the old city of Louisville. The red here is the independent or incorporated cities that were incorporated prior to merger. And then the blue part is what I'm calling the formerly unincorporated area. So this is all of Metro that was not in a city before that is now, okay? And these three pieces are mutually exhaustive and non-overlapping, okay? So when we talk about Jefferson County, these three pieces are what I'm going to be talking about. So just to get us started, this is what population change looks like over the last 20 years. The urban service district, the old city of Louisville, has actually lost about 10,000 people. Interestingly, over the past 10 years, so from 2010 to 2020, it's actually gained population, just a little bit, which is the first time that it has gained population since 1960. So it was very exciting for us. You can see the incorporated cities have remained mostly flat, and nearly all of the population growth in the county has occurred in the formerly unincorporated areas. And so this includes everything down to the southeast, PRP, Valley Station, Highview, Fern Creek, Okolona, Newburgh, Fairdale, over into the east, east of Middletown, the Henry Road, old Henry Road area. So this is everything in those areas. So we saw that the independent cities have mostly stayed flat. In fact, the growth in the independent cities has been made up of growth in 5 cities in particular: J-Town, Middletown, St. Matthews, Linden, and Hurstbourne have gained nearly all of the population during this time. About half the independent cities have, half of the incorporated cities have lost population over the last 20 years, although most of these losses were very small, a couple hundred here and there. And so this is what we're looking at. It's hard to make out the hashed marks here, but these hashed marks area, the areas with the sort of the netting over them, these are what are called census designated places. Basically, they don't exist as cities, but we know them as places. So for example, PRP is here showing the population gain there, although it's just a part of the unincorporated area in reality. Going a little bit closer, just to see where some of these cities sit. Again, most of the growth you can see is down along the I-64 corridor. So starting at Hurstbourne, going out through J-Town and Middletown and Woodland Hills. And then the Westport Road corridor has seen more, sort of a little bit more loss, but there's been some places growing, St. Matthews and Linden to be exact. So like I said, these, the first 5 cities listed here, these are the 6 cities with the largest population growth and the 6 cities with the largest population loss. Of course, Minor Lane Heights and Heritage Creek are special cases. Minor Lane Heights, of course, was dissolved, and Heritage Creek took most of the population. So we're sort of keeping them together, but they're not technically together. But outside of those, you can see that the most gain was in Middletown by far, the largest gain. And some of this may have to do with annexation prior to merger. I'm not exactly sure. It's probably not that much, but some. And then the population losses, relatively small, even for some of the larger areas like Douglas Hills. So what this means in terms of sort of population power within the county. Back in 2000, the formerly unincorporated area was still the largest population concentration in the county, although the urban service district had more than a third. And over the time, the unincorporated area has gained people at the expense of the urban service district. And so at this point, about 50% of the county's population is in these formerly unincorporated areas. In terms of housing, all of the 3 areas have actually gained housing, and including the urban service district. And so what this tells us is that, well, what we know is that households are getting smaller. So new housing goes in, and old housing, of course, remains, and larger families move out, and then they're replaced by smaller family sizes, single people, childless couples. So we see the housing remains the same, the number of households remains the same, but we do lose people through there. And of course, we see the same picture in terms of housing change, where the unincorporated area has gained housing units, sort of at the expense of the urban services district, although all of them have gained people, but in terms of the proportion that they're seeing. So let's talk a little bit about income, and I will just stress that these income figures are preliminary, and we will get better income figures when we start looking at the tax data, the tax receipts from different taxes in the county. But overall, aggregate personal income in Jefferson County increased by about $2 billion in real terms. So this is after accounting for inflation. This is all in 2020 dollars. The urban service district lost personal income, probably related to the fact that they lost population, although we don't actually know where these people are working. We only know that this is where they're living. The incorporated cities, flat personal income, and then of course the primary growth in personal income across the county was in these formerly unincorporated areas.
I'm sorry, could you repeat what you said about these numbers and where people work versus where they live, I gather you were saying?
Yes, these numbers are based on where people live. So these people that live in the urban service district had personal income of $6.7 billion in 2020, but they could have been working elsewhere. Okay, when we get the tax data or the different tax datas, we'll be able to narrow that down. But this is just residential. Per capita income looks about the same. Overall, per capita income in the county has gone down. So our population growth has exceeded our income growth, basically. And this does have to do with growth in jobs at the lower paying end of the sector, so primarily in retail and services. The per capita income has gone down in all three areas. Of course, the incorporated cities have higher personal per capita income to start with. And then finally, median housing values. As we know, housing values have been going up. Again, this is also controlled for changes in inflation. And we've seen median housing value growth in all three of the areas. The highest growth has been in the formerly unincorporated areas, followed by the urban service district. There's been less housing value growth in the unincorporated cities. And I will stress that this is based on what people are reporting to the census. So people tend to overvalue their house. So we do have actual parcel data, which shows the assessed values of properties. We will be using that for the final outcomes here. And then just a couple of other social or socioeconomic outcomes. As we know, the the percent of adults with people 25 plus with college degrees has been increasing. This just shows how this has changed across the three areas. In both the urban service district and the formerly unincorporated areas, we've seen growth in college degrees by about 10% of the population. Slightly smaller in the incorporated cities, but they have higher college completion rates to start with. And then a couple of other of items that might be of interest here. So owner occupancy rates in the urban service district have continued to decline. This is related to growth in housing or growth in multi-unit housing in this area. So as more apartments go in and more other similar multi-unit housing, homeownership rates decline. In fact, homeownership rates have declined across the board for all areas. Of course, we see more multi-unit housing in the suburbs now than we used to see, and that's reflected in these numbers. At the same time, we've seen a growth in single-person households. So single-person households are one-person households. That doesn't mean that they're not like in a relationship. They're just one-person households living by themselves. This is the most common household type in the urban service district, but it also has been growing up across the board. So, of course, this is reflected in pressure in the housing market on having enough or adequate housing. And then at the bottom, just two sort of large demographic trends in household formation and family formation. The number of households with children has been declining across the board, about the same in all three geographic areas by 6 or 7%. And the number of households with seniors has been increasing. So it's been increasing a lot in the incorporated cities and the unincorporated areas. It's remained flat in the urban service district. This has really important implications for, well, I'm sort of getting off base here, but this has really important implications for, how in the transportation systems in these outer lying areas, as seniors tend to be a little bit less mobile than others. And this is we're expecting this to continue to go up for at least the next 10 or 15 years as the baby boomers continue to age. I don't know why I put my contact info on here, but here it is if you need it. And I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about this.
I have a question. I don't think I heard it correctly. Maybe I did. You mentioned on the urban service district back on this slide, they're not numbered, this would be population change from 2000 to 2020. You made a sort of an addendum to this piece, which was there was increased population growth, even in the urban service district. It's trending the other way. Was I hearing that correctly?
Yeah, so the urban service districts has lost 10,000 people since 2000. But since 2010, it's actually gained. So it lost 12,000 people between 2000 and 2010.
Back 2000.
And then it gained back 2,000.
Right. Okay. Thanks.
Yes.
One other thing, if I may. On the basis of this, you're not prepared to draw any particular inferences from these, right?
No,
Okay.
no.
But you can at some point with other data.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
This is just sort of for individuals that are not super familiar with the area, maybe. This is to give an overview of what's happening. I think a lot of people don't really understand where this population growth has occurred. But like I said, we don't in this have anything about where people are working, where taxes are flowing to or from, expenditures, any of that. This is all just straight population and housing growth.
Can I get a clarification? I'm over here. The last slide, I thought you said the owner occupied, that it's gone down over, in each category it's gone down prior to the first, I guess, well, they've gone down. Did you say there's more apartments coming into play? And then when I look at single-family homes, I'm gonna take that, could mean actual one I guess a property with a house or multi-unit, even though they're condos.
Yeah.
They're going up. Could you
Yes.
help?
So let me just clarify. A housing unit is any housing unit. That includes single-family homes, an apartment in a multi-unit building. These are all different types of housing units. So when I say a single-person household, this could be in a single-family home. It could be an apartment unit. It could be a condo. It's just a one person living by themselves. And so the owner occupancy rate in the single-person households are sort of a mirror of one another. As we have more single people who are more likely to be living in multi-unit buildings, then we're going to see lower owner occupancy rates.
Okay.
But there's nothing here about single-family homes themselves.
Okay. But, and I know there's not enough to analyze here, but my first takeaway, when I first look at this, I'm thinking we as state, as well as I know on the Metro Council, want to try to get owner-occupied units and not get out of the apartment mentality, to get people to start owning homes, whatever the program or whatever the process we can do. So and this will be fleshed out later on, but it seems to me that we might be going down not to say a wrong path, but a path we need to reconsider in terms of these apartments, how they're springing up, what they're doing, regardless of where they are.
I don't think that you're wrong. I think that you're correct. I will say that this is a 20-year change, and I think a lot of this change happened in the early part of the 2000s before the housing market crash. Since that time, I think we've seen sort of a change in how. So I think it's quite clear that we want to increase owner occupancy rates.
Okay.
But the cost of housing also is prohibitive to many people for starting this. So we can't basically build single-family housing that people can afford at this point in time. And that's just a sort of a general thought, not I'm not showing that here necessarily.
And if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, so going to the per capita income slide, compare that to the median in housing value. Looks like each category went down in terms of per capita. Even though the median housing income has gone up. What kind of, I mean,
The median housing value,
yeah, sorry.
the median housing value has gone up?
Yeah, and I mean, I may be taking a leap too far forward, but, you know, one thought was like, are folks getting a little more, putting a little more in debt? Even though they're getting pinched on the income? I'm trying to see if there's anything
So,
to draw.
yeah, there's no doubt that housing as a percent of people's budgets has increased dramatically over the last 20 years. So housing used to be maybe a third of people's budget. It's about a half of many people's budget now. And so that is what you're seeing here. Also, per capita income is sort of a strange measure. We use it, but it's not, doesn't necessarily have to do with earnings. Because when I say per capita, that includes children and people that aren't working. It's all the income in an area over the number of people in the area. So we can also look at earnings. I don't have earnings in this particular slide because we'll get those when we look at the taxes. It's a more effective way to get at that.
Well, I got some more, but I think more data will help answer that question. And you may not know just because you don't have enough data to substantiate or go there. But I just found it a little bit striking, interesting in terms of looking at those two charts. Like I'm sort of like, what's going on here?
Yeah, there's a housing crisis. That's what's going on outside the scope of this particular commission.
Thank you.
Chairman, I have a quick question. Are you familiar with Urban 3 and their study around suburbia being subsidized by urban cities?
I am not familiar with that study.
Okay, I would love to just hear your opinion about it and if it has any sort of influence on the way that this data is broken down. It talks about car dependency quite a bit in the suburbs and how they're actually like net negative in terms of revenue generation. So I'd be curious to see how that fits in with this.
So Dr. Coombs and I probably have slightly different views on this, personally, but it is going to be very challenging because, and I've been thinking about this a lot. So for something like, for example, if you look at freeway construction, there's been a lot of money spent on freeway construction, interstate construction, and it's very expensive. And, it goes through the city, and so we don't, but it's not benefiting the city generally. And so it's really challenging to determine who benefits from this freeway construction, right? Because we don't necessarily know who's driving on it. So from the point of view of this study, we don't want to say, oh, there was 10 miles of freeway built in through Portland, and that's benefiting the people of Portland, because that's not accurate. It's benefiting people outside. More to the point of your question, Kentucky, I believe that impact fees for development are illegal in Kentucky. So new development obviously they're responsible for their own utilities and oftentimes their own roads, but everything to get there is usually borne by the general public, right? So when MSD decides we're going to move sewer lines out in this direction, everyone is paying for that. So it really gets to the difficulty in these big capital projects on where do we assign expenditures and benefits.
Mr. Chairman, one comment that I noticed about urban, unincorporated and also incorporated cities that are losing population. And then you look at the back about seniors. So I think a lot of what's happening is we're losing seniors. But then those that are there, especially in the formerly unincorporated, notice the amount of growth and how much services needed, as you stated, transportation, and you have an exorbitant amount of seniors. How did they get where they need to be if they don't have family and things like that? So it's really interesting to watch where this growth is coming. And I also talked about Douglas Hills. We did lose a couple of hundred folks, but what was not included was a new development that we have. It's putting it back another 161 plus a development of another 40 condominiums. So those will fluctuate, as it goes on. But thank you so much for the information.
Yeah, I mean, we have to keep in mind, of course, that all new development, we can't say that so it may benefit Douglas Hills, right? But in terms of where those people are coming from, these people are generally not coming from, Massachusetts or somewhere. They're generally coming from other parts of the county. Population isn't, or housing, new housing isn't a net gain in terms of the county, right? I think what you said was true. I mean, no parts of this city, or really probably any city, are losing seniors at this point. Seniors are growing everywhere. I think what you're seeing in these incorporated cities is that, some of these are what we would consider first-ring suburbs, and they're also losing families to further out to exurban areas. And then the housing is being replaced by smaller households.
Yes, because when I look at when we're doing property taxes, I have almost 600 folks on homestead exemption. So we are older city, still with seniors, with a turnover of new families that are coming in. Thank you.
I wanted to ask, is there anything, if you can comment, anything about these data or these trends that strikes you as different from, let's say, other metropolitan areas? And if there aren't differences, how would you compare this one to what group of metropolitan areas that would be like these kind of patterns?
I think Louisville is very similar to most cities in nearly all of these patterns. Nothing really stands out. I think, so the growth in the urban service district over the last 10 years, I thought was really surprising. We are seeing this in some other cities. Cincinnati has seen some sort of a back to the city movement, but Louisville has not really seen that yet. And so that was something new. In terms of like the adults with degrees, the single person households, the seniors, these trends we see these everywhere, in all metropolitan areas that aren't, New York City or Los Angeles. So I'm talking Rust Belt and southeastern metro areas. Nothing really stands out. The owner occupancy rate here is a little bit lower than in some cities, at least in the urban service district. And I think that's just because of how it is designed in this study, right? Because all the suburban areas are part of the formerly unincorporated county. I may not be making myself clear there, but we do see slightly lower owner occupancy rates.
Okay. Anybody have any other questions?
I have a quick question, Matt. In your population change on both charts, I assume based on another chart that says Middletown, almost 4,000. Is there a range that you've assigned these different colors in terms of growth? I assume the dark blue would be, well, I don't know what the dark blue, is there a range that you assign these different colors in terms of the growth?
Yes.
Okay. Could you?
Did you want to know what it was?
Yeah, if you don't mind.
I have no idea. They're actually based on percentage changes.
Percentage changes?
Yeah. So Certainly the red or the pink is any population loss.
Oh, red's a loss.
Yes, so anything that is red is a loss. And then the blue, as it gets darker, it's a higher gain.
Higher gain, okay.
Yeah. I think that when I made this map, I had a really good reason for not putting a legend on it, but I cannot remember what that reason was.
That's okay. All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Let's see, there's another set of data here. Are we going to go through these? Is someone going to present this?
Why is it not? That'll work. There you go. Okay.
Am I live here? I am. Okay. I guess first caveat, I'm not used to actually sitting down and talking, so usually when I'm talking to a group, I'm kind of wandering around a classroom or something, so I'll do my best. So what I want to talk about today, okay, what do cities spend on? So what I want to kind of do is just give an overview of what we sort of expect or what we see across the country and sort of local versus state expenditures. I kind of want to highlight that. I'll talk a little bit more about that. And I think to lead forward, and I think some of the questions about comparisons, one of the things that I think is valuable in thinking about understanding the effects of merger and so on, are comparing across other cities that have merged governments, Nashville, Columbus, Indianapolis, Jacksonville, for example, as well as ones that do not have merged government, and see what happens there, see what happens in terms of expenditures, distribution of expenditures. And so that's kind of where what I hope we can do some of, if, of course, the committee thinks that's a valuable thing to do. I think that may be kind of enlightening to better understand things. We're not there yet, but that's the hope. Okay, so Paul suggested that I talk a little bit about what we call the study of fiscal federalism, and because that's kind of what I do. It's been my interest for a long time, and so broadly, you know, what does that mean? It's this idea. This is in economics. I like Paul. I'm an economist at the Department of Economics at the University of Kentucky, and at the Martin School of Public Policy. And so this idea of fiscal federalism is focusing on the assignment and allocation of public services across different levels of government. Thinking, not surprisingly, since we're economists, this literature, thinking about the implications for efficiency and provision of these public services, what level of government might do it better, what might not. And also, of course, distributional implication. And so that's one of the questions involved. And we sort of think about this as sort of decentralization or centralization is another consideration. And when I say, level of government, we can also think relevant to this study, obviously, and to Louisville, thinking about sort of the size of the government, the size, for example, of the local government, how much of the market is it capturing? And I'll talk a little bit more about thinking what the implications of that are. What we think a lot about when we look at these issues of fiscal federalism, looking at provision, particularly of, say, local services, and of course, on the other side, local taxes, I think there are a couple of key considerations. One is mobility. And that what is, I think, the thing that distinguishes thinking about local governments and state governments to a certain extent as well, maybe more so on the firm side than people, but certainly states as well, from national governments. We don't worry too much about emigration from the U.S. because of changes in tax policies, or emigrations in because we get more attractive public services, right? States, on the other hand, in localities in particular, have to worry a lot about that, or are more likely to it. And many, many studies, Paul and I have done a study a number of years ago that looked at these issues about how do individuals respond to these differences in terms of where they live and where they work based upon differences in public services. Okay, so that's one thing. And then, of course, the other part of this that I think is particularly relevant, less studied in the literature, maybe because it's more problematic, is sort of the economies and what we call diseconomies of scale. How do costs change, say per capita costs change, when we increase the size of the population being served? Are we reducing duplication? Are there kind of limits to how much that works? That's obviously another critical thing when we sort of think about say, the size of the area being serviced. So those, I think, are some of important considerations. Now normally, of course, if this was an academic thing, I'd have all these lists of papers, people's names following it about who wrote different things. But I won't do that, though I may mention one or two names because I think they're just so important. But one of the important things to think about with decentralization, about sort of local provision, which, well, let me back up. And so I will be a little bit academic here. Okay, so here's a problem with sort of public services, it's thought of, is I can't tell, I know how much you value private goods, right? I know if you buy something in the store that you must value it that much. All right, now that's using, of course, considering things like you have the money to do so and so on. All right, but we kind of use that as a premise that those people who really want it and condition have the resources are able to pay for it. That's an easy signal. Okay. The argument has been for services provided by the government, I really don't know how much you value them. How much you would pay for an additional, some increase in the quality of education, increase in national defense. We don't have, right, we're not trading money directly. We're being taxed. Nobody asks us that. Okay. Well, all right, there's an exception to that. All right, so I will put one name out here, just one, because he's kind of my hero, I guess, in this research. His name's Charles Thibault, and he came up with and there is another economist you would have maybe heard of, Paul Samuelson, very famous. If you are older, you would have had his textbook as your principles course. Okay, Paul had it. All right. Paul and I had it, maybe nobody else. All right. Well, anyway, he's a Nobel laureate, probably the most famous American economist. Well, he sort of put this idea out that, hey, the problem is you have no idea how much people value these public government-provided goods. All right. Well, what this Tebow said is that, you know what, if they are valued by, say, local governments, and that you can only consume them in that local area, we kind of do know how much you value them because we observe you choosing to live there. You choose to live in an area that maybe has high-quality services and higher taxes. All right? It's a signal to do that. Now, as an aside, one of the ways we do, and I've done quite a bit of work on, is there's even we can think about taxes, but that's kind of tricky. We think there's a better measure of these public services, of how much people value them, and I've done a lot of this with education, and that's how much you pay for a house. And so what this, there's countless studies that have done this, but have tried to relate how much people value and pay for houses, controlling for the obvious characteristics of the house, square footage, things like that. And then say, well, okay, can we sort of get at controlling, separating out that stuff, how much you were willing to pay or effectively did pay for the educational services. So as a plug for myself, we just did this with Frederick Douglass School, opened in Lexington in 2017. Well, and their new districts, well, you know, we knew the data before on the houses, the selling price there versus other areas. We knew the selling prices afterwards, so how much did prices change? No surprising. Well, for those of us from Lexington, brand new school, right? Changed from Bryan Station to Frederick Douglass, controlling for all the other factors, 6% increase in property values. Okay. Well, and we think, those of us who did the study, think that's a pretty good measure of kind of what it was bringing to them in terms of, you know, what they perceived the educational value. So that's one of the aspects. Now, one other thing I'll mention, and this is where I've done a lot of work, is kind of the flip side. It may kind of be, I think, relevant for thinking about the merger. One of the issues, and again, more so I think for localities, some sense to states, is that thinking about, this is more tax side of things, but it's not exclusively, is that when I choose, for example, if I decide to raise my taxes, what am I going to worry about? Say a business tax. I'm going to worry in part about whether firms leave, whether employment goes down. Now, okay, that is a bad for me. But it's actually a plus for another area. Those firms don't disappear, they just move somewhere else. And so when I, as a local government, am actually making a decision about my taxes, I'm not taking into account. Louisville is not considering, when they're talking about their tax, they're not considering if I increase my tax, I'm going to lose employment that is going to relocate in Indianapolis. They're not thinking about the benefits to Indianapolis. All right. But there's a sense in which we're talking about a social, somebody say, federally, we might think about that. So that's another flip side, and maybe one of the issues to consider. Same thing with public services. I pull in more attractive public services. That's a plus for me if I bring in some tax base. Well, somebody else is losing because of that. Okay, so it kind of complicates things. I will say as a side, it's competition. We like competition in private sector. And it depends in part what you think of government. If you think government is setting these policies in the best interest of its residents, then this may be a downside. On the other hand, if you think they're not doing that, it it may be a positive. So I'll leave that to you about whether you think that your governments are serving your residents or not, but that's one of the things. Now, another thing finally is sort of thinking about exploiting economies of scale. Okay, so what does this sort of thinking suggest about, you know, where we might see different services and sort of what would the economists say, economics suggest about levels of governments for different services, and primarily for efficiency reasons, I think, has probably dominated the conversation, but not exclusively. Well, local, limited returns to scale, that bigger doesn't reduce cost dramatically, no spillovers in services, so that the services are to a limited area and you're able to kind of control those. Education is certainly an example. From what I'm learning about police and fire, maybe less so here, about really defined for a specific area, that maybe there are some. So we expect those kind of locally. State, broader area of benefits and spillovers, greater returns to scale, highways. All right, I mean, when I'm talking about, you know, major highways, well, we can't piecemeal those across local governments. Higher education, I think that's sort of taking advantage of returns to scale. Louisville, I don't know what you're up to in terms of students, what, 20, 25,000? Yeah, and we're plus 30, right? Sort of returns there. Corrections, public welfare. So let me just say a little bit about this. One of the real sort of issues with public services in general, public welfare programs, things like that, is sort of mobility of recipient population, mobility of taxpayers paying for it. And the more mobile the population, the more likely people can move between jurisdictions providing it, kind of the more problematic that might be. We tend to think that pushes up sort of the optimal, the desirable level of government tends to be a higher level of government where we have less concerns, fewer concerns about this mobility. In federal, well, I think, you know, the obvious ones, national defense, probably public welfare and assistance. We expect more. And so the general rule is lower level of government, maybe less redistributive tax and public services policies can be, the more isolated, the limited the area for, I think, obvious reasons. That's kind of a general rule for thinking about them. And we can kind of see, I want to show you here just a couple figures based on the U.S. average of local and state expenditures, kind of what I think is reflected, in fact, what we do see in terms of services. So I'll put up a couple figures here. Mine are not as pretty as Matt's. I think I'll concede that. Though I do want to point out that I did specifically choose the colors for this presentation. And so I did put red, okay, and I put blue. And I thought, well, local should be red, all right, and blue should be state. Okay, right, fair enough. Well, all right, no surprise here. I'll give you a second to look, but you can kind of see, of course, education dominates it. I'm going to give you a slide without education because that's not in the purview of this committee anyway. To give an idea of this is the U.S., kind of what localities do. A couple things should be said, and later on in the future, you know, we're going to go and disentangle and talk, as I mentioned, about thinking, here's kind of where Louisville is. Here's maybe some comparables in terms of what they're spending on. So this is share. This is not how much. This is share. And so obviously the biggest things are education, and that's no surprise. You can see, I think, you know, kind of the key is to sort of look at the different things. As sort of I suggested, state is more involved with public welfare than local governments. That's probably not a surprise, given kind of, at least as an economist, we would sort of expect that. fire, police protection. Again, this is probably not new information to any of you. But this is giving you, and I will say the other thing to think about here is I'm taking this over all types of local governments. All right, so we're comparing, rural, small towns. They're lumped in here with major cities. So I think there needs to be a bit of a caveat on that. I did do this. This one is the same, but let me do this. So excluding education, because that's not in your purview, maybe we just kind of looking at this gives you an idea of kind of the resource. And now, again, not all of these are in your purview, but I thought it was useful to kind of see an overview of kind of where money is going for most, for in some sense, the average locality. This is 2020. That's the most recent data. So this is fiscal 2020, so it hasn't been affected too much by COVID. I don't think we have too much of a COVID influence in this. Maybe I should have done 2019 in retrospect. Okay, so here's a view, and I'll leave it to you to see whether this how this looks like compared to what you might be expecting. And again, I think important to note that this is across a lot of local governments. I think more valuable and what we intend to do in the future is to try to say, okay, here is kind of where Louisville is matching up to comparable, what we think of sort of comparable cities, some consolidated, and I think some not consolidated, and see kind of do they match up. The other thing I wanted to do, and this was maybe as much my own interest as for you, was, okay, and I took out education again. So what's happened in 20 years? Again, Matt gave you a little bit sort of a 20-year perspective. So we lined up on dates anyway, Matt, so that was good. So I guess they're kind of the obvious dates, 2000, 2020. And so, what has changed in how our mix of spending here and over the U.S.? I guess I would say kind of surprisingly little. I don't know what jumps out at you, but you can kind of see of spots the public welfare looks like as a share had gone down. Hospitals, health have gone up. Police protection, pretty steady. Fire protection, again, pretty steady. Corrections declined a bit. All right. Again, this gives you an area. So, but I think again, the more interesting thing is to sort of say, okay, not compare Louisville to the U.S. average, but really designate what we think are some comparable cities, some consolidated and some not consolidated. So that's kind of what I have. My ability to do stuff is limited by my incompetence in downloading census data, and I'm ashamed to admit that my two colleagues here said it's a piece of cake, so they're going to teach me a little bit more, but we'll do more in the future on that. So I'm happy for questions. Yeah. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, K-12, yeah, K-12.
I just want to clarify. So this is U.S. data.
Yeah.
And it's not Louisville.
It's not Louisville.
So when I look at hospitals, I keep getting myself caught and looking at it from a lens of Louisville. Louisville Metro government doesn't have any hospitals. So could you help clarify that a bit, as well as the airports?
Well, yeah, so a couple of things here. The airports, I think, is a good example. So, right, this is all types of local governments. So we're not talking just about, say, city governments or even just, county. We're aggregating in watersheds. We're aggregating in special airport districts and things like that. So they're all aggregated together. And so, so for example, the airport, right, is a case where probably for most of them, it's a separate defined area that has its own taxing authority. So that would be that. And then, some of these things, for example, are utilities jump out, right? It depends, of course, in part on the structure of the government, whether those are privately contracted, are regulated but private, versus ones that are actually a public entity.
So local spending, local government spending is defined as several different types of taxing jurisdictions.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, so I just cannot look at it, and I should not look at it just like a government, like metro government.
That's right, and I mean that is the limitation with kind of the data that they provide on an annual basis. Now, what we do, the census does every 5 years does a more comprehensive collection of data, and that is data that will provide for the actual governmental jurisdiction. Okay, so I think that's a more valuable thing, right? So that we can actually, so it won't have expenditures that are not, for example, part of metro government. It will have metro government as separate, and then can be defined there. So, I think you'll get a better picture there.
Okay, so this is obviously this is a high altitude perspective of what's going on, which I think sets up a nice little framework of what to work for. And then I assume you'll go through and peel this back to focus in obviously on Louisville, and then, in terms of metro government, obviously the hospitals, for example, that will be zero.
Yeah.
So, okay, all right, good. I just want to make sure.
Yeah, and, I guess one thing I would say here is concentrate on Louisville, but we need to have some perspective, right? And so I think it's valuable to look at sort of Louisville and look at Louisville in a comparison what's happened over time in Louisville. And, but, things may be changing throughout the country for cities over 20 years. And so the other part we need to do is have some perspective about what does Louisville look like right now? What does Indianapolis look like? Maybe look what Cincinnati what Cincinnati looks like, which is not like us, not consolidated. And also ask, how have they evolved in the past 20 years versus how we've evolved in the past 20 years? And, kind of the idea, right, is that we had a major policy change during those 20 years. What ideally we'd like to do is say something about, all right, what about areas that did not have a major policy change in the past 20 years? All right, have continued to be deconsolidated, I guess might be the term. And so I think that's a valuable way to look at it. So that's one thing that I hope to do.
All right. That's good, and I appreciate that. On your second slide, it says what level of government does what under decentralized mobility. And the third item, race to the bottom, and you have the first bullet, competition for tax base among jurisdictions equals lowers public services. So,
Yeah.
And you give me perspective on that, because where my mind is, and it could be wrong, but obviously we got 80 plus cities. Are you referring that structure when you make this statement, or is that just in general? Because, when we look at competing with other cities, obviously we're going after other types of taxpayers, which bring them in, and that will increase public services. At least I hope it would.
Oh, so Tell you what, say that last part
Sure.
again, if you will. Don't.
Well, I mean, when you say competition among tax base among jurisdictions, that could be Louisville and Lexington. We might be going after a particular entity to bring them in. So if Lexington wins, that wouldn't lower your public service, but it will, they'll hopefully increase the public service or benefits. But Louisville, I would assume we was made the same because we'll keep plugging along. I guess, could you help me out with that?
Yeah. So, well, okay. So now you're looking at a special, kind of tax competition. So, well, the term that I used long ago was bidding for firms, right? It is actually, really off. I think you're talking about sort of package for a firm.
Well, yeah, but it can not only be for firms, but it can be for individuals like you and I. I might be thinking I might want to move to Lexington. What's going to benefit me by going there and so forth. So it's really not only the firms, but it's also individual level.
Yeah. Okay. And so the idea here is, the idea of this, and it doesn't necessarily mean this result. I can talk a little more about that, but I guess generally sort of what we kind of think would be the case in the literature is maybe at lower service. Louisville cuts its tax rate to try to attract some firms. Okay. All right. We would expect a reaction from Lexington to do the same, right? They're in competition for this firm. And so the idea, this is this race to the bottom. Now, people don't go to the bottom. We still have taxes, right? But sort of the idea that absent that, say if we had if it was done by the state rather than the two localities, we might have a higher level, higher tax rate. That's sort of the idea in thinking about this, that states, in a lot of, there are a lot of studies that have tried to look at whether or not tax changes in one government leads to responses in another. And a lot of evidence suggesting, yeah, there is some of that. That's the idea behind it. We like that idea in private markets, right? That's the whole point of it. Private markets is we want the price driven down by competition to reflect costs and consumers' benefit. And it could well be the case. Again, that's why I said it's kind of whether or not you think that governments are kind of doing things efficiently. If they're not doing things efficiently, this tax competition is a good thing. All right. Because it's forcing them, right, just as in the private sector is going to weed out inefficient firms. Price competition will weed out the inefficient firms. Well, we don't literally weed out maybe governments, but we force them to be more efficient possibly. So that's certainly a possibility. It's kind of frustrating. We still haven't figured that out in the literature. What are governments really doing? How can we characterize them? Are they pretty much getting things right for their residents, or is there waste? All right, Paul, you have your opinion.
Well, I just have a great example for Ken. We see that Tennessee has a 0 income tax rate on individuals for wages and salaries, correct? And you've been leading the charge in Frankfurt to get Kentucky's income tax rate from 6% to 5% to 4%, heading to 0, I believe. So that's a great example of what Bill's talking about. That's state level competition. And I'm sure you believe that by lowering that Kentucky's individual tax rate, we will be more attractive to high income earners and to capital and to businesses. So.
Mr. Chairman, I can see where that would apply if you're dealing with economic development and Lexington and Louisville examples. But in Jefferson County with the 80 cities, I've got a tax base of .135, and I supply full-service garbage and snow removal and infrastructure and parks and pools and things like that. And I don't have a lot of businesses that economic development is going to affect me other than the person might choose to live in my city. So with this unique situation, we have next to me is Jeffersontown has a different tax base. Blue Ridge has a different tax base. And so the competitiveness within smaller cities, I think, is among themselves to do what they can do for their citizens. Because I said something about snow removal one time, and a person in urban service said, "What's that?" You know, or full service garbage at our place. So on the federal level or on an economic level, I can see where this works, but when it comes down to the local government and the uniqueness of all of what the services they provide, I think you just got to look at them individually to see if the folks are getting what they're asking for and what they're paying for. And I can absolutely say yes, you know, because if you got enough money, rainy day money, to take care of the trees at $36,000 on a Friday night, then you obviously are, you know, servicing your folks. So that was just my opinion about that.
Well, Professor Hoyt, let me ask you this. Tell us then, how do you see the data you have here, or this approach, applying to the mission of this commission?
Well, so I think that's kind of what, you know, I've talked very briefly to Matt and Paul and about this, but what, you know, the mission is to sort of look at the effective merger.
Right.
Okay. So if we sort of think about how to view merger, we can talk about, okay, here was Louisville in 2000. And here's Louisville in 2020, and we can think about the different parts of Louisville, obviously, as we've been doing. And we then, so in doing that, I think one of the things we want to ask about is about, all right, here's what happened in Jefferson County in those 20 years. In terms of government services, government expenditures. But we need to do more than, I think, that, right, to really understand. We need to say, well, okay, that happened in Jefferson County, but maybe that happened in Indianapolis too. Maybe that happened in Cincinnati too. And so we can't really say anything about merger until we have a better understanding about other places.
Right.
And
No, I take that point, and I guess I've assumed all along that some part of the effort here would have to be a question of comparing what happened here to other peer or other kind of cities. I think I find this interesting, this particular point, because I think when we have been talking about collecting data on revenue, expenditures, et cetera, the question was, where was that leading to, aside from navel-gazing internally about whether or not that was a good or a bad thing? And it's really relevant, it seems to me, then, for comparison with other cities, what's happening elsewhere. So I appreciate that point. I don't think you're looking at comparing small cities versus large cities versus unincorporated versus the urban service district. That's not the issue here. This is just some way of looking at expenditures generally, as then how they'll sort of figure in the analysis of comparing Jefferson County, Louisville, to other cities.
yeah, that's I think the key. And in meaning, as you sort of suggest, meaningful cities, right? I mean, things that we, you know, I think we probably are receptive to thinking about what you think are. One of the things I've always been interested in, sort of literature. Who are the competitor cities? I don't know. Who's Louisville's competitor city?
It changes from time to time.
Well, I'm interested in hearing this because I've been trying to, because I have my thoughts.
There's I had to commission a study, God, when was The Urban Services District, Janet, she went through and she listed like 16 cities. Indianapolis, Charlotte, Cincinnati, Nashville, St. Louis. I don't think, was Atlanta, you probably know, Paul.
Yeah, I did the original one.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah,
I knew
so
that.
I can help you there. That's easy. to,
Yeah, but-
since
but,
the
yeah,
peers.
so-
But
so,
to answer Earl's question more generally, though, I don't think we're pitching this as the main thrust
Yeah.
of the merger study. It's more context. It's not a major part. I think what you all are most interested in is the geographic distribution of who's paying taxes and who's getting services within the county. That's where most of our effort's going to be for the next few months, to zoom in at the fine geographic level and say that suburban cities are generating X amount of dollars in taxes, insurance premiums, property taxes, et cetera. They're providing these services in those areas. Metro government is collecting these taxes, they're providing these services. Unincorporated areas generating these taxes are getting these services. That's where the thrust of our study is. And I hope I'm correct on that, because that's definitely what we're programming to do.
Yeah, I certainly that should be the case. The only point I guess I was trying to make is some part of that, or at least some of those data will have to take into consideration what has that meant for us versus what has happened in other locations. And as you now address those data and what the implications of them are, can you take lessons from other places to say, this is as it should have been, or this could have been differently, or as we now consider what the implications of merger have been, what remedies might be, we might apply, et cetera. I wanted to ask another question, if I might, and that is this the kind of analysis that could point out what might be, let's say, gaps in the differences of services between the various entities inside Jefferson County, right? In other words, there's a question here about what are the gaps that should be identified to be addressed?
Well,
How not defined?
I honestly think the gaps issue is more of what Paul was talking about, as sort of the cross, what we would think about a cross area in time. You know, this would be more, I mean, we can say about sort of here's what's happened in time, or here's what happens. You know, it's a little hard to say, break down and make sense of, well, here's Cincinnati area where they're all independent, and then say, well, here's, I think, Jefferson County where we have the urban service districts, we've got the unincorporated, we've got the other cities, and try to match up there, right? I think that's going to be a tough thing to do. So I think the gap stuff is really more of, right, this area versus this area within Jefferson County. And I think that's more the initial pitch. And so this I don't think will offer too much on that.
Okay, good. Any other questions on this presentation? Next thing on the agenda is committee reports.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, we were going to meet this week, and we couldn't meet because my calendar got pretty
Thanks.
Press hard.
pretty muddy. I would like to get our folks together to meet with Dr. Coombs and his folks, maybe sometime late next week, just to get a little more meat on the bone in terms of what he has so far, and then we'll be able to give you a little more information later on. So I don't have anything to report right now.
Okay.
I can jump in for the issues committee, and just to remind everyone, we were supposed to look at services and responsibilities distributed between Metro Louisville, suburban cities, and special districts, and talk about what we can do to work together and make them better. So we haven't all met together, but I have met with Councilman Piagentini, and we've talked quite a bit, and with others via email. We created a spreadsheet of every Metro government agency and services. It also includes related agencies like MSD, Park, Kentuckiana Works, TARC, anything within the metro government org structure that was approved with the 2023 fiscal budget. We've also received services via expenditures for suburban cities, and the next steps would be to take all of these different agencies and services, consolidate them in one place to better understand what's distributed and how we can work together, and hopefully report something back maybe for our next meeting.
Mr. Chairman, the GAPS Committee did meet this week on Tuesday, and we've set a schedule up now to meet biweekly. And so we started off just kind of going through and just as a reminder, so we're looking at identifying gaps and inadequacies and improvements needed in Jefferson County government, and then coming back with some recommendations. One of the major things that we're talking about that was a big focal point for us was really kind of the defined element of hard gaps and then soft gaps, where soft gaps are kind of perceptual to a certain degree today comparatively to what the original intent was when the consolidation occurred, and then getting together with Dr. Coombs on what specifically hard gaps, what we can look at in terms of hard gaps and inadequacies in various areas. We want to, we'll develop a list of ways to improve and come back with recommendations on those specific problems and bring that back to the commission. We spent a tremendous amount of time, this seems to be a regular theme about garbage collection. So that's kind of the example that we get all the time. And Councilman Arthur, if you could share some of that information that you have over with me, I think that would be very helpful for us. Also, the map that was provided today is certainly very helpful to me. One of the things that we will be doing is also coming up with a survey that we will be distributing to all the Metro Council representatives in terms of what they are hearing, seeing, and experiencing with their citizens as it relates to the gaps. And we'll break that down both in soft gaps and in hard gaps because we feel that getting buy-in and input from Metro Council, since they obviously represent all of the districts in the city, would be exceptionally helpful. Our next meeting is scheduled for 2 weeks from Tuesday, which is the 21st at 5 p.m. Dr. Coombs, if we could beg you to participate in that, we would appreciate it. That way we can get a little bit more guidance in terms of how things are laid out. So that's kind of a brief overview. Co-Chairman Jones was on with us. Thank you for participating. You certainly kept things lively. And that's my report.
Yes.
Forgive me, I'm not familiar with the terminology. Soft gaps and hard gaps, and what is that? How do they relate?
Soft gaps, we really came up with were more in terms of what people today perceive to be services that they're not receiving, that most likely they're not paying for, as it related to how the tax structure was originally implemented, and services through the process when the determination of consolidation went out for a vote, that certain areas did not rescind. That's why we went into garbage. We spent a lot of time discussing where they are not, certain areas are not paying for garbage service, but they feel somewhat disenfranchised was the word that I'd heard, because they have to go out and they may have 2, 3, 4, or 5 different contractors that are individually contracted with, either by the residents that are within that community. So there are trucks there all the time, garbage cans that are outside, et cetera. So that was what we determined were quote unquote soft gaps. Hard gaps would be where there are services that should be provided or are not provided to the degree that they are supposed to be within those respective areas.
So one is where they really should not have expected it because they didn't pay for it, and one is where they have a service but it's inadequate.
Yeah, and one of those examples that we talked about were roads.
Yeah.
So as developments occur where master plans or where new areas are being developed and the road infrastructure has not been provided.
Okay. I think I understand. Thank you.
Certainly.
Thank you. Any more business before the commission this evening? If not, we'll adjourn. Next meeting is 1 month from today. I can't recall what the schedule is, but it's the same Friday, second Friday of the month, 3 p.m. here. Thank you all. I was saying, it's just, I don't know the date, but it's the second Friday of